What's up, Q? How you doing, man?
Everything is well, and happy belated New Year to you. Appreciate a couple moments, and let's get into a little NBA before we go back to the NFL. And we are fast approaching the trading deadline. Let's talk about a couple things for a minute. As far as the Eastern Conference, I think it's a foregone conclusion whatever team comes out of the East is going to get smacked around by the Golden State Warriors. But what were your thoughts about the whole debacle with the Cleveland Cavaliers and basically, and I think LeBron turned it into a coach killer, getting rid of Blatt, and then the Cavs turn around and they hire Tyronn Lue?
I thought it looked just as bad. I did, and I thought it was a bad look for the league. David Blatt's a guy that's very well respected in international play. And yeah, is he a coach that, could do some things differently? Sure, but he's also, by, NBA standards, a new coach. So, I'd rather have a new coach that, had a 30-11 record and had taken my team to the finals the previous year any day. I think it looks bad on LeBron, too. I mean, it really does. Let's call it what it is. This is a guy that has shown that he wants to have the deck stacked in his favor wherever he's been, wherever he's gone. And this is another, example of that, where he wants to have his handpicked guy in Tyronn Lue as the head coach. And I don't think it necessarily changes the fact that, like you said, even if David Blatt or Tyronn Lue's the coach, they're still going to come out of the East and get beat down when they play Golden State. So it doesn't matter.
With the trade deadline around the corner, there are reports that maybe the Clippers try to move Blake Griffin. I mean, look, they're a better team, it seems, when he's not on the floor. I think he's extremely one-dimensional, but I know in the NBA it's tricky. Sometimes you got to get that third team involved. When you look at a guy like Blake Griffin, when you look at a guy like Kevin Love, who might be on the block as well, do you start to say to yourself, look, these are guys that they never find a way to just fit in? And I make stronger case for Love because I think it was a bad move by Cleveland, and it seems as though this guy can never find his place on the floor. But what are your thoughts on Blake Griffin for a moment?
Well, I think Blake Griffin, as athletic as he is, as you said, he is one-dimensional, and today's game is set up for you to have a stretch four. Those are guys that can put the ball on the floor in open court. They can shoot the three. They're just multifaceted, and I think Blake Griffin doesn't fit, actually, the way today's game is going. You're starting to see centers now. The old plodding centers are starting to become archaic. That's why Dwight Howard's having problems everywhere he's been. So, the way the game's changed, you're going to start seeing some of these bigs who can't do a lot of things. They're going to start being tradable assets. And I do think Blake Griffin actually holds the Clippers down when he's on the floor. You're starting to see DeAndre Jordan look better because he doesn't have to share the paint with another guy. So that's a good call on your part.
What about Kevin Love? I actually used it. This is the player that I tried to come up with that reminded me of Kevin Love throughout the course of his career, because a guy that I thought was always talented, but never really, when I say find your place on the floor, it just never always seemed to get comfortable at times, only for a couple years with the Nets. He reminds me of Keith Van Horn.
Yeah, that's not a bad analogy. I kind of liken him to like a Derek Coleman type player.
Okay.
A guy that can do a lot of things at 6'10", 6'11", but another guy that you really didn't know what he was. Even Rasheed Wallace, another guy, from up your way, guys that have a tremendous skill set. Say what you want about Kevin Love. He's got a tremendous skill set in everything, but where do you put him? I think in Minnesota, we're starting to see that maybe the numbers were a little inflated because he really didn't have a lot with him. So he had to jack the ball up a lot. He did everything. But maybe Kevin Love isn't that 5-star player that we've always thought he was. Maybe he's a 4-star. It's just what team is going to find, a good place for him and put him on the floor. I don't know too many teams that could really use a player like that. I know people are talking about Boston, Q, but does he really make a huge difference in Boston for them? I think the pieces are in Boston to be a good team. But does he make them a championship caliber team or a team that could actually, challenge Cleveland? Maybe, by minus one player from Cleveland makes Boston better. But does that really make them a championship contender? I don't think so.
I think the one reason that Boston shouldn't make that move, well, kind of twofold, is the fact that Brad Stevens has quietly done a really good job with a young team, a team that plays hard every night. You kind of see it in their effort, and they're just quietly, I don't want to say hanging around in the Eastern Conference, but they're winning some games here and there. I don't think you want to disrupt that chemistry because, to me, Kevin Love needs to get the ball. You need to get him involved early in the offense. Forget about on the fast break. It's more of the half-court offense. He has to try to create a shot. I think that would just – I don't like how he would disrupt the flow of a team, and I look at a team like Boston that I think right now, when you look at the way they're playing and the way Stevens has them playing, and they're playing defense as well, I don't think that move would be beneficial to them.
Yeah, I think the perfect fit for Kevin Love actually would be right here in my own backyard with the Wizards. Problem is, they've pretty much put all their eggs in one basket, and that's to get Kevin Durant here in the offseason. So obviously that won't happen. And let's face it, they really don't have a lot of trade assets to make Cleveland want to make that move. And I'm sure Cleveland would look at it like maybe they're helping another team get better. There's going to be maybe 5 or 6 teams that could use Kevin Love. The problem is that, is he going to be the dominant 4 that he was in Minnesota? And I'm not sure if he can be anymore.
No, I don't think he is. And I think you bring up a great point. I think those numbers were overflated. And we've seen that with players. Let's stick with your Wizards for a moment. Anytime I get an opportunity to watch John Wall play, I just kind of sit back and I enjoy it. It seems as though he's turned into a smarter player this year. Like, he's a scorer, and he's a point guard, and he'll distribute the rock. But there are times where he looked to score first, then distribute. And then sometimes this year I see him look to distribute, then to score second. What are your thoughts about his progression over the last couple of years?
I'm so glad you brought him up because I don't get a chance to talk about him a lot to people, and I think it's a shame because he is one of the best point guards in the NBA. I actually have him, a distant, obviously, third behind 1 and 1A, which is Westbrook and Steph Curry. But I think if you look at his overall game, you can put him up against anyone because he plays defense. He distributes the basketball. He can score. And if you take him off this Wizards team, they may be hard-pressed to have had 12, 13 wins this year. That's how dominant he is. And I don't mean dominant where he dominates the ball, but he's just the centerpiece for that team. And I think if you look at where he's come from, he's a self-made player. And those are the type of players that you want to root for because you remember he came in as the number 1 pick from Kentucky, and he struggled. He really did. He didn't have a jump shot at all. Teams dared him to shoot. Now, he's actually making a pretty high volume of, considering he shoots all the time. And if you look at his stats from night in and night out, this guy, if you play fantasy ball or something like that, he's one of the higher paid players every night, and he gets you his points, he gets you his numbers.
Before we switch gears to the NFL, I know you're a G-Town guy. Allen Iverson, no-brainer, lock, Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. When you look at AI and you look at his size and the way he played the game and you start to put him in that category of the best little men that ever played, just your overall thoughts and sentiment on Iverson. And I also think, too, his style of play shortened his career a little bit because he had no problem taking it among the trees. That's just the way that he played.
He did. He was reckless. And I think people in your market up there really were fortunate to see not just one of the better little guys, one of the best players ever. Whether you call him a winner or, a guy that had his issues with us in the media, the guy could flat out play. And when you look at him pound for pound, he wasn't 6 feet. The guy's like 5'11", 160 pounds soaking wet. But he was probably one of the toughest players I've ever seen or ever covered. And I think if you look at what he did for Philadelphia as a city, that's the problem with the Sixers right now. They don't have a player that represents Philadelphia, that toughness, that gritty play. And Iverson was probably, my God, when you think of Philadelphia, you thought of Allen Iverson and vice versa. And I think both miss each other dearly right now.
Well, listen, you go back to Iverson, you go back to Brown, and when they got Deke, when they got Mutombo, and they had McKee, and they had Snow, and that team that went to the finals years ago, that was a gritty team. Look, they beat Milwaukee, they beat Toronto. They weren't beating the Lakers. But when they got that win in the opener of the series, when he steps over Lou, everyone thinks, man, this guy is taking it to another level. You're absolutely right. Okafor is going to be one of those players in the NBA that is going to get his. The problem is he plays defense in the NBA like he played defense at college. And again,
he didn't.
and I got hammered for this last week saying it, and I stand behind it. Brett Brown is a nice guy, and Brett Brown is doing the best he can with the pieces that he has in regards to what Hinkie has given him and the picks and the assets and the drafts. But the head coach also has to instill defense in a player. And players, for that matter. And sometimes I just don't see this kid running the floor. You can call it laziness. You can call it a disregard for defense. But if you're that player and you want to be the face of the franchise, again, it's all about selling out. You know this. You got to play both ends of the floor. And I think that's a trickle-down effect. I think when the players on the other 3 or 4 guys on the floor at the same time, they see that, defenses want. You got to want to play it. And I think they're having a hard time really starting to get him more involved in the defensive end. Noel, beast. I love this kid. But I look at Okafor and I'm like, man, for a guy that's going to put up 18 to 23, 24, 25 a night, just play a little more defense.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these kids come out of school, and we know they're coming out as babies. They're not even staying 3-4 years. Yeah. So they're coming out, and defense is probably the last part of their game that they've never been asked to do. Because going back to the days of AAU ball, high school, then college, they were the man. They were the number one option to score. And now they get in the NBA, at 19, 20 years old. They don't really understand a basic principle of defense. And you're right, if your coach isn't really force-feeding them that, they're just going to, get even worse. They're going to, regress. And I think a lot of times you see some of these young players, Q, and not only does their defense, stand out or lack of, it makes their offense, digress as well. And I think now you're starting to see a guy like him where you remember the first month or so he was in the league, he looked like a phenom in the making. But now people have figured out people have figured out some things about him, and they also know on the other end of the court, he's not coming at you. Right. He's struggling a little bit, if you ask me.
A couple more minutes. Lake Lewis from About.com and Sports Journey Radio joins us for a couple moments. We'll take you up to 2. As far as the NFL offseason with the Washington Redskins, it by all accounts, I don't know if they're going to cut ties with RG3. I'm curious about Kirk Cousins. Get your thoughts on that, because it seems like he's ready to break the bank. I mean, is he a $100 million quarterback in the eyes of the Washington Redskins and Snyder?
This is a tough one here, because I've taken a lot of heat here locally for saying that I think they should franchise him. A lot of people, some of my colleagues, don't think that he should be franchised. They think they should pony the money up and give him, a long-term contract. I'm just not.
You're not sold yet on him.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not sold on him. I mean, he's a guy that's worked his tail off, and everything he accomplished this year was because of his effort. But at the end of the day, you have to be realistic and realize this team benefited in a lot of ways, and I'm not taking anything away from their hard work and practice and all that stuff and winning the division. But they benefited from a down division. You can't run from that. The Giants were historically bad. The Cowboys were abysmal. A lot of injuries besieged this division. The Eagles, the whole Chip Kelly drama. There was a lot of stuff going on in the division. And on top of that, they had the third easiest schedule. Next year, they're going to have the third hardest schedule. They're also going to have possibly 2 back-to-back games in London, which has never been done. And then on top of that, the division's going to be better. So I think, you franchise the guy, you let him prove to you that, hey, I can do this. Give him a chance to have off-season OTAs as the starter, minicamp as the starter, training camp as the starter. Because remember, he was given that job at the end of preseason pretty much. So now you get a chance to really let him work off the success he had last year and see what this team does in 2016. And if they do defend their crown, or they're a competitive football team that's right there at the end of the year fighting for a playoff spot, pay him the money. He'll be worth it at that point.
What was your takeaway from the Super Bowl? Was it people? I had Denver winning. I thought people were overlooking the Denver defense, and I thought they were looking at it from this standpoint. Peyton Manning's 39. He's got nothing left in the tank. Oh, we forgot about the defense. And I thought Carolina kind of took him for granted a little bit. But I want to get your thoughts on just the game itself, but also Cam Newton and the fact that he didn't go for the fumble, and also the fact that after the game, during the post game, he basically had just ridiculous sour grapes, and he came off like a petulant child. But your thoughts on the game itself?
I thought the game, if I'm an old school guy. I don't like offensive shootouts. So to me, I thought the game was entertaining from a defensive standpoint. Lost in defeat was the effort that Carolina's defense put up as well. I mean,
they're great defensive.
Exactly. They kept the Panthers in that football game throughout, when realistically, if they didn't have a good defense, that would have been a blowout of epic proportion. That's how bad Cam Newton and the offense looked. A lot of guys dropped passes.
Yep.
It looked eerily similar to, just a young football team that they got on the biggest stage that there ever was, and they panicked. I mean, they looked like they could never get their footing, with them on the field, and Denver took it to them defensively. As far as Cam, I was disappointed. I really was. And listen, you're a competitor. I'm a competitor. I was the worst person after a loss. I mean, even going back to college, at Penn State, I hated losing. I could not stand losing, and I was one of those guys that, had to take some classes, anger management, to get your thoughts together. And so I agree with Cam in the sense that if you show me a person that accepts losing, I'm going to show you a loser. But at the end of the day, you smiled all throughout the playoffs when your team was blowing teams out. You have to stand there as a man and accept defeat as well, and you have to accept it graciously. And I do think this hurt him because he was really close to becoming the face of the league, really that close. Had they won the game, perhaps we would have seen that, but we would have seen him smiling at the podium.
Yeah.
So I think it's a learning experience. I mean, he's a young guy. I do like the fact that it stung him. I do like that because that means hopefully he'll work harder to get to that ultimate goal. But next year he's going to have to show a more humble side to his approach.
I agree. Excellent takes as always, my friend. We'll talk next week. I appreciate a couple moments.
All right, take care. Appreciate it.
You got it. Lake Lewis doing a great job. About.com, Sports Journey Radio. Good stuff on the Skins. Pretty interesting take on Kirk Cousins. I think the Redskins, I think they're sold on Cousins. I think the fact that he had all those comebacks, he had the big win against Tampa, he had the big win against the Eagles. Well, actually, they won 2 games. Again, they swept the Eagles. I saw something in Cousins that I haven't seen in RG3 when RG3 was playing, and that was a guy that had the respect of his teammates.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Command of the huddle.
And we just got done talking about how players hate the franchise tag. If you do tag Cousins, you risk just making him unhappy and just souring the relationship. He wants his money. He deserves his money. I mean, did he win a weak division? Sure, but what's the alternative?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and they still have RG3, and wouldn't that be something if RG3 goes to the Rams or RG3 goes to Cleveland? So, again, this is why it's a very interesting time in the NFL, a week 2 removed from the Super Bowl. 141, we'll close it out on the other side.